Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Ed Lovett. I'm the Director for Educational Technology and Distance Learning here at Johnson County Community College. And we are doing, I think, our final faculty online showcase for the season. And today we're joined by Vicki Kelly, who's the Program Director of Master of Health Science in Healthcare Education at Washburn University. She does entirely online program, which is developed from ground up. She also serves as the Assessment Director for Washburn University. Dr. Kelly holds a Doctor of Education from Baker University, an MS from Central Michigan, and a Bachelor of Science from Washburn University. She's taught for 10 years in different programs at Washburn across 3 different programs, WebCT, Angel, and D2L. She's trained in QM and also an advanced certification in OLC. So Vicki, welcome.
Thank you.
Before I get started, I do my little commercial. So let me go ahead and I'll go on to the next part. Our KCREACHE Showcase is brought to you by members that we have here at KCREACHE. If you would like to be a member of KCREACHE, we'll give you some contact information here in just a second. But there's a lot of benefits to that. I know that many of us use it as a networking opportunity to reach out to each other and kind of as a sounding board. We also have what we call a peer review process that's through the OLC scorecard. And that's probably one of the things that is really exciting about this organization is the ability to not only talk about ideas, but also have individuals come in and kind of take a look at your course and give you positive feedback on that and what you're doing well and opportunities for improvement. If you want to know more about KCREACHE and opportunities for membership, you can contact me with the email and telephone number up above, or you can reach out to Tim Peterson, who's our Director of Quality Assessment with KCREACHE. So thank you for that little attention, and let me go ahead now. I'm going to stop the share process, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Vicki, if you'd like to do whatever you want to get started with.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity this afternoon. My name again is Vicki Kelly. I'm the Program Director for an entirely online graduate program at Washburn University that we developed around 5 years ago. And it was the first fully online graduate program at Washburn that also used a compressed format. And we primarily did that for a couple reasons, because the audience we were serving were working adults, and second, because I have over the years become such a strong advocate of online education, having not had that opportunity during my educational career to take advantage of it, that I fought for it to become a fully online program. I'm going to take you through, well, to start off, one of the questions that was asked of me is, why did I decide to teach online? And I had to laugh a little bit because I really wasn't offered the choice. When I was first brought on as faculty, the university was using WebCT, and the program that I was teaching at, that I was hired to teach in, was partially online and partially face-to-face. When I first looked at the online courses, I really wasn't thoroughly convinced that they were doing what they should be doing. And I taught both online and face-to-face. But through the help of one of my peers who's also here today, Dr. Tim Peterson, I did my doctoral dissertation looking at the effect of online courses, because I went in thoroughly convinced that online was not the way to go, that we should go back to a fully face-to-face program. Let's just say I switched 180 degrees. During my dissertation process and in working with students, I found that the key wasn't just what I was looking at, what I had been given, but was really about quality instructional design. So after I finished that, I sort of made the commitment to, at that time, put my courses through the QM process. And since that time, I've not only developed another program that's completely online, but I've put it, I've also worked through the Online Learning Consortium, OLC's Advanced Distance Educator Certification, because once I made the commitment, I decided I really wanted to go all the way. So hopefully, I've got 2 courses I want to share with you. The first one to kind of give you an overview, because this program is just a little bit different than courses that work with undergraduate students or that don't necessarily work with a cohort. We bring in cohorts of students. So the very first course that the students take are a Foundations of Education course. The reason I bring this up is because the difference between working with undergraduates and a graduate cohort is that we get them, and I've got them for 2.5 to 3 years. So the first course, the announcements, I do put up a welcome announcement, but the content is really where the students get introduced to not only online education, but also the D2L system, Desire to Learn, which is what we use here at Washburn. And when I set up the program, I sort of designated it would have a standardized content and a standardized look, because we wanted the graduate students to be worrying less about how the content looked or how it looked, and more on getting into the content of the courses. So my very first course, and other instructors who teach in the program, we try to introduce ourselves. I use a photograph and a kind of a biographical overview in my Read Me First folder, and that's really a carryover from both QM and OLC on having that first point of contact for students to go in, and includes my syllabus, our university syllabus editions, and I'm also a big effort on time management, so every course that I set up, I put a separate schedule up so that students can download it. I do link to the calendar in the Desire to Learn system, but I also like to have a separate schedule that they can copy or paste onto their desktop, print it out, put it by their computer, whatever, because we are on an 8-week compressed format, which means they are working very hard. Our students only take one course at a time, so they have to fully commit to that 8 weeks, and it goes very quickly of type of content. And then at the beginning of the program, we do talk to them a lot about netiquette. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I show you the other course, because I do also teach an instructional technology course where we kind of ask them to go back and rewrite their own netiquette statements if they're going to be moving into an online format as well. And then every class that I start off with, even though we are in a cohort, we also offer a postgraduate certificate. We have people come in sometimes at different times. So we always start off with an introduction. We have students from East Coast to West Coast, and so this is entirely asynchronous, because we don't really have an opportunity to do synchronous sessions with healthcare workers. They're working 3 shifts, 7 days a week, and so the opportunity to put together a synchronous session is very difficult. So we try to make sure everybody knows who is working, who they're working with in the class. Every class is set up in modules or units, and again, because it's a compressed format, we divide everything up in 8s. So it's either module 1 or unit 1. Every unit, again, going back to QM, has objectives for the unit. The syllabus also outlines how the program objectives and the course objectives are aligned with assessments, but each module also has their own unit objectives. And then there's also an opportunity for students to have discussions on a weekly basis. In this particular class, there are 2 discussions every week, supplemental materials. And one of the things that it encouraged me to do when I was going through both the OLC was to get lecture material up. I myself am not an auditory learner, and I don't like people to sit and read PowerPoints to me or to lecture for long periods of time. I was one of those kids in the class that was looking out the window or doodling on their notepad if somebody talked for a long time. So I opted since a lot of healthcare people are like me, we're more kinesthetic than we are auditory, I opted for very short lectures. I used PowerPoint Presenter and used either the audio or the video overlay. I do like the audio a little bit better because it does allow the students to have the notes portion, but that was probably one of the biggest difficulties that I had with it, was scripting exactly what I was going to say, so that if I had a student who was learning disabled or someone who needed a screen reader, you know, if I had somebody that really needed the notes to look at, to make sure that everything that I said during the presentation was appropriately scripted within the notes. So when somebody said to me, gee, that's nice, you have 15-minute lectures, and I tell them, but it takes me about 10 to 15 hours to write a 15-minute lecture, to be very careful with what it is that I want to say and what information I want to get across. So every week students do have a short lecture. They do have assigned readings, either in a text or supplemental readings, and then participate in discussion questions. One of the other things that I try to do is all of our, because it's graduate programs, we don't use a lot, in fact, I don't use any testing. We may have some, you know, we primarily use discussions and papers, and those, if the papers are short enough, they'll be included within the weekly assignments. But if it's a pretty good chunk paper or over a 2-week, I put them into separate modules. And I almost always have a course project for students to work on. One of the things that I have found is to really organize the classes, and I do this with every class, so that students know their course projects open up about 1/3 of the way through the class. So, because as I said again, 8 weeks goes very quickly. As part of that schedule, and I'm going to go back to that again, part of that schedule, everything is outlined on the schedule so that it can be downloaded. It'll take just a second here to, everything's lined up so that they know what their assignments are and what assessments are and when they're due. And we use that kind of schedule for every class throughout the program in order just to make that, again, so that they're not so worried about different things or things changing within the content, and they can concentrate more on what the content of the course is. Course syllabus is there. Students getting help, all of that I also have described on the welcome page or on the home page, and I reiterate that in every class, because students do forget. Who are they supposed to call for technical help? Who are they supposed to call? When can they contact the instructor? Because of the short nature of this class, I have pretty quick turnaround times, so I get all papers back to them within 5 days after the last due date, and I respond to all emails usually within 24 hours, if not sooner. We have to do quick turnaround time and give sufficient feedback in order for them to move and grow forward because of the short format. So organizing the content with the student feedback, I generally use the D2L system and embed my rubrics right into D2L. But in the case, because it's such a writing-heavy curriculum, I download the papers, do all of the markup, and do it in Word and re-upload the files to the students along with their assessment sheet, so that they have an opportunity. One of my goals in the future is to start either doing some video or audio feedback as I go through the papers. But again, because of the number of students we have, graduate papers don't tend to be short. It's everything I can do right at the moment to give sufficient feedback to them to help them move forward. So that's one of my hopes in the future, is to move toward video, either using the system within D2L or setting up individual Zoom sessions, which I do on an as-needed basis. There really isn't a lot of difference, but I wanted to share one other class a little bit, because this instructional technology is the class I actually worked on to go through the OLC Advanced Distance Educator certification, which is a little bit different than the Quality Matters in that it looks more specifically at what you as an instructor are doing, and really kind of reached out a little bit more in terms of chance. This is a class where in the content I tried to switch it up a little bit as we were going through, because the students are learning instructional technology, everything from the use of smart boards, VoiceThread, some distance education, PowerPoint using Mix. So we're trying to get them into using a lot of different types of instructional technology. And I sort of felt like if I had that opportunity, if I was using the opportunity to teach them instructional technology, I had to up my game a little bit. So in this particular class, I did go to using the PowerPoint video option. And one of the nice things about it was that it does allow you to close caption your videos. It was a little bit, and you can fancy them up just a little bit. I've got one of them running. Primarily, the closed caption option on this does not allow the students to see the notes, though. So one of the big disadvantages was by using the auto caption, or the auto feature on closed captioning, was that I had to go back and really make sure that the translation of what it thought I was saying was absolutely correct. So I solved that by, again, rewriting a whole script and using the script as I went through. I'm probably not as good at video lecturing as my students tell me I have a face for radio, and that's okay. And so I tend to do a lot more audio capture, doing audio instead of the video captioning. But the possibility with PowerPoint Presenter is also there, and it's, again, something I need more practice on, but I think will add a little more interest to the classes as I go through and rework them. That's kind of the whole brunt of it there. I know I talked very fast, so Ed or Tim, if you have particular questions.
Well, Vicki, I think you answered the question about the presenter. Now, is that a Microsoft product that you use then?
I use Microsoft PowerPoint. Presenter is actually an Adobe product that's an add-in. It doesn't require the whole Adobe package, fortunately, but it does require an add-in to PowerPoint. And I actually started using that, Ed, before they came out with Mix. And so I've had students using Mix instead of using Adobe Presenter, so they don't have to purchase the additional, and the Mix will allow embedding videos. And it's actually part of Microsoft Presenter or PowerPoint without having to add an additional program.
And I mean, you talked about the captioning. I mean, that's becoming a huge issue on our campus.
It is.
You know, I think videos are great. They're fantastic. I think they add a lot to, the courses. But, accessibility is also a huge issue too, in making sure that those are captioned. So
yeah, absolutely. So that was one advantage when I kind of dove into it, was how do I do the captioning? The nice part, there were pros and cons. Letting it do the auto captioning, trying to capture my words, it wasn't. In fact, sometimes I got to laughing so hard from what I thought the computer thought I was actually saying. But the good thing about it is that it had the correct timing. So I could go back in and rewrite the script, which I basically had, and keep the same timing so that the correct amount of captioning came across the slides instead of, words getting ahead of actually matching my mouth. So that was probably the hardest part of it to learn. That and just, moving it, it gives you the opportunity of either having your face, having your slide in the face, or just having the slide. And I think it gets difficult when you're dealing with the accessibility issues and you're trying to stay on task and stay on a specific script and not cast your eyes up or down to make sure that you're staying on script. Even though you've written it several times, it always seems like that's the point you have to sneeze and stop, or the phone rings or something. So to try to get all that without making it look very awkward, I tended to flip it over to the slide view anyway. And so after that point, it was like, well, this is nice, but I'm not sure for the purpose of what I'm trying to do, which is get lectures across with some specific concepts, that the audio overview isn't more accessible, it isn't easier, and now with the availability of Zoom, if we want that face-to-face contact, we can you know, a one-on-one with a student if they have specific questions. It's very easy to set up a Zoom session and do a screen share as we're doing today. So.
Well, that was going to be another question. Was I know that we're using Zoom today, but you know, any synchronous, you know, products that you might use in your class for office hours or anything like that?
I do primarily use Zoom. One of the, well, and with this instructional technology class, one of the things I try to do, because the cohorts are together, is try to set up one synchronous session, send out a doodle, try to get as many people as we can to come, because so many of these students have now done an entire online program or close to it asynchronously, that they really do enjoy getting together in a classroom and record it for those who are just not available. I will do office hours, though surprisingly for the number of online students I have, they prefer telephone calls, they, you know, like emails, and good, bad, or indifferent, I tend to be totally too accessible to my students. So they know a lot of them are working on things on the weekends. So while I tell them I'm not going to respond, I always do, because if they're in the middle of a project on Saturday afternoon, I'm not going to make them hang till Monday morning to get an answer back on something in particular. So in those cases, I've actually used FaceTime if it's over a weekend and they've got an iPhone and I've got one, if we need to talk through something. But primarily in the classroom setting, I do use Zoom.
Excellent. I just want to remind the audience out there that we do have a chat window available in Zoom. So if you want to type any questions, I see some familiar names on the list. So if there's anyone that would like to ask a question, feel free to do that. You know, Vicki, another thing was, I think we were going to talk about the netiquette. Did we get to that second course yet? You said you were going to kind of talk about
well, that is one of the things, my netiquette statement, and let me go back and I'll share that again. I do with there we go. The netiquette statement, and I'm happy to, if anybody wants. I won't claim that it's entirely all of my own doing. In fact, I put it together and cited it from a couple different things. One of the things that I have found is I have students in the instructional technology class. One of the things I have them do is write their own netiquette statement in case they're going to teach online. The good thing about graduate students is you generally don't have to remind them about netiquette. After the first time, they're generally not there. They don't get into arguments, and they're generally very, very respectful and, you know, really trying to work toward the class. With undergraduate students, I posted the netiquette statement at the beginning of the class and sometimes had a quiz over it. And, you know, a few times in my career, I had to shut down discussion postings just because of comments that were made or had to warn students. But the netiquette, there's lots of different guides out there. I put this one together and I've shared it with other faculty on the Washburn campus. So again, I don't claim originality. It came from a couple different sources, as you can see down at the bottom, and put it together when I first started teaching, because I had never really appreciated the fact that language could disintegrate so badly on an online course in this kind of a setting until I taught a couple of classes, and then I suddenly realized it was necessary kind of to set those rules up. With graduate students, like I said, I've never really had a problem. With undergraduate students, I do send them back to the netiquette statement in every class, and I do deduct points from the rubric if, for some reason, if I have to take down one of their postings or shut down a discussion board at all.
One of the things I've been really struggling with a lot on our campus is cheating, and I think sometimes it depends upon how you define that. We know it happens where a roommate might be taking a class at the same time and maybe take an exam prior to another one. Sometimes at graduate level you don't have the exams, but have you had to deal with cheating, or do you have any mechanisms in place to deal with that?
We do have a campus policy, Ed, on academic impropriety for students. Our policy is generally first off, it's up to the instructor. I have had sometimes students don't do very well when they're really cheating. They submit the same paper and like forget to do a search all and take all the roommates' names out of it or their partners. And in that case, our policy is for the first step, the instructor can handle it if they so wish. After that point, then it goes to the Student Conduct Council through the Dean of Student Services or the Associate Dean in Student Life for a hearing. I've only ever had to handle that a couple of times. Again, with the graduate students, primarily so much of what we do has to be cited, and we use APA citations that I don't think it's ever, I have not run into it yet where it was deliberately an act of cheating at the graduate level. At the undergraduate level I have, and in those cases I've not had to go to the student, to the full inquiry yet. Both students, it's the first time in my life I had two young men in tears in my office at the same time, but it never happened again. So I tend to, with my students, give them, about one shot, enough rope to hang themselves. They generally get one. They miss a test. They have some excuse. They're late with a paper. They don't properly cite. If they don't take the instruction and the feedback and use it, and what I tell them is I absolutely have it takes a lot of my time to do feedback on their papers. If they're not going to use it, then that's entirely their decision. They're adults, but they don't usually get a second chance if they don't, start doing the proper citation or do the work. So,
Vicki, this is Tim. I just noticed a post in the chat from Elizabeth saying that she's heard of students taking tests as a group instead of individuals. Have you ever run into that?
No, I have not. And again, with my graduate programs, I do not. Some of our programs here, specifically radiation therapy, they use Respondus Lockdown, and they also use a 360 camera. So the students have to record themselves using the camera, make a 360 loop, and make sure that there is no one else in the room with them. So I generally, with undergraduates, I generally checked IP addresses. I generally checked the amount of time they spent on the tests, especially if I knew people were fairly close in proximity. But again, and if they came up with exactly the same answers, that would be. I don't like that. I don't like to have to do that, but you do have to watch. You do have to watch to make sure they're not doing it. So
we've got another question from Susan over at KCK. She wants to know if you find that the lockdown browser works well. It seems that it would be easy to defeat.
Yeah, I think, I think if there's a will, there's a way. Lockdown browser seems to work well from that standpoint that, there is a specific sign-in to get into the system. It's just, and it has to come in from specific IP addresses. But that doesn't stop somebody else from taking. I guess the only way you can get away from that, and I've never had to resort to that, is to have students go in and take a proctored exam, especially for those who are at a distance. I have proctored exams for many students on campus that were taking courses, through other universities or, taking something where they needed to be proctored. I understand the need for that, but that would probably be the only solution to that. Granted, they're going to find a way. Quite honestly, the best way that I could say that I found, and again, it was with undergraduates, was, to get away as much from multiple choice, from fill in the blank, and go to open-ended questions that were open book, that had a specific time. And generally, I didn't find a lot of cheating in those, because you know, you can make them a whole lot more intense than A, B, C, and D. But it just depends on who you're, you know, what you're trying to assess and what you're doing with your students.
Well, Vicki, when you talked about those two young men in tears in your office, I had a flashback of the Blues Brothers movie when Jake and Elwood go to visit Sister Mary.
Oh, thanks, Tim. That's not what it felt like.
But seriously, I just wanted to comment that I had the pleasure and privilege of collaborating with Vicki for at least 10 years, if not more. She also managed and taught in the undergraduate technology administration program, went through WebCT to Angel to now D2L. So she's done and seen it all. She probably won't tell you that she's ADD, so she's always doing something to improve. I mean, she truly is a hallmark of continuous improvement. And I guess the question I have is, particularly listening to you talk about, you know, Adobe Presenter and then using the mix in PowerPoint. What have you found over your 10 years or better in terms of all that time and effort in the technology, the instructional design, the content development, in terms of return on investment, in terms of student learning outcomes?
You know, that's an interesting question, because one of the things I pound into my students in the instructional technology class is that technology is a tool. You know, it's absolutely a tool. It's a wonderful tool, but I've been to several conferences where people get enamored with the latest technology, and they want to try Twitter falls, or they want to try Facebook, and that's wonderful. If there's an absolute reason and a good reason to use that to get the content across, for me, the amount of investment in time has been incredible. I mean, if somebody had told me 10 years ago how much time it would take, you know, to set up, and I know people here, because I teach entirely online, think I'm just sitting in my office playing solitaire all day, but I'm constantly, you can't be behind the game. So on an 8-week cycle, I am constantly, while I'm teaching 2 or 3 or classes or 4, I'm working on the next session that's going to start at the end of May. And once it gets done all summer, while I'm teaching those, I'll be working on the fall ones. So I always have to be constantly ahead, and it does take a tremendous amount of time. I'm not sure if it's age or exhaustion, but I don't get quite as excited. I get a lot of the newsletters, emerging ed tech, and I look over those things, and I look and try to decide if there's really a return on investment, or if what I'm using is delivering what I need to get across. The only way that I can do that is look at the students and see if they're still getting the content. Then I don't generally, you know, make huge drastic changes in the delivery of the technology. I'm pretty concrete, sequential. If you looked at every one of my classes, you would see the content lines up pretty much the same. The messages, and my students like that, because I think they're all pretty concrete, sequential too. So I don't, you know, everything tends to be very straightforward, and there's nothing there that's really extraneous. I don't throw in a lot of videos just for the fun of it. If they're there, it's because they cover something that I think needs to be covered that I can't do myself. So does that sort of answer your question, Tim?
It does. And I guess the thing that has been my experience over 20 years, more or less, on and off teaching online, is that, and part of it perhaps depends on level, graduate, undergraduate, and content. And while the technology needs to work, it needs to not be an impediment or obstacle.
Yes.
The feedback I've always gotten from students is not unlike, you know, what you get in a classroom, which is to be engaged, to be actively learning and teaching, and learning as an instructor and responding to students. I can't tell you how many times over the years where I didn't set that trigger for the next quiz to be released or whatever. Point that out to me, and it's always, well, duh, thanks for letting me know that. I didn't realize it, as opposed to, getting upset or defensive about it. And students seem to genuinely appreciate that. They appreciate, developing a relationship that's certainly a professional relationship that kind of transcends the content, if you will, that whole active learning and engagement with students. And I think that is challenging sometimes online. And I guess the only other thought is that when you talked about the asynchronous aspect and the challenge with the multiple time zones, the work shift schedule for your population, I can appreciate that. But I always think it's even more challenging in an 8-week course or summer course, obviously. But whenever you can, I mean, the feedback I've always gotten, whether it was a phone conference call or a Zoom session, students really do seem to, the ones that I've worked, appreciate that sort of sense of community that brings that you don't get on a discussion board always. So just an observation.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I try to do that as much as humanly possible. Because we're kind of on a cohort model, I can sort of judge cohorts differently, based on where they're coming from, personalities, what their needs are. And so every cohort is a little bit different, but I've had some that, just jump on that, any chance to, and I've if I've had them working in group projects, I've actually told them, I'll set you up a Zoom room, or you can use, Google Drive, you can use SharePoint, whatever it is that you want to use to set up your conversations or your shared work. And they do like to do that. Some of them have even gone so far, even though they don't live in, even I have some in Kansas and meet in Kansas City for coffee. I mean, just to sort of get that sense of community, try to kind of figure out, and get that support. And I appreciate that. And it is difficult with distance education.
Vicki, if you said you didn't have a choice when you started teaching necessarily, but if you were to, give some words of wisdom to, teachers out there thinking about, teaching online, what would you tell them?
Gosh, I would tell them, I don't know that I could go back and teach face-to-face anymore, quite honestly. Though I do occasionally go in and teach a class. The one thing about it is it's completely different than taking what you do in a face-to-face classroom and try to throw it online. I think that's the biggest mistake, is that people feel like, well, I'm going to have them read the text, so I'll just have them do some readings. And it takes a lot of thought to get that engagement from missing that 3 hours or 5 hours in a classroom where they're sitting there and you're lecturing to them. The second part of it is if you can't sit still and listen to it, they're not going to sit still and listen to it. And distance education students, for the most part, manage their time very well, but they don't generally, they're not going to sit down and listen to an hour lecture. They're not going to generally, they're going to break their reading up on their work breaks or wherever else. So you kind of need to be cognizant of that when you think about it, especially with undergraduate students. I would chunk stuff up, even, of course, that was over 16 weeks. And so it was a little bit easier to chunk things, but sometimes it was over 2 weeks and discussions were spread out a little bit longer, or lectures were broken up into 3 or 4 15-minute spiels instead of talking for an hour. And so I think you just kind of have to be a little bit, it's more work up front, but there is an opportunity to still really develop a good relationship with your students. I have very few students. I go to graduation both fall and spring, and when I was both teaching undergrad, I have students who I have never bodily seen face to face, who I feel like I know like one of my children because of the relationship we've developed online. And when I see them at graduation, I will deliberately go down and pick up their note cards to see who's going to be there, because in some cases they've never been in my office. We've talked over computers, we've talked over the phone, we've talked by email. I know a lot about them as their advisor and as their professor both, and that's kind of the frosting on the cake for me. is to have them come to graduation because they really want that final connection as they're getting their degree. And for me, that says we're doing something good. I mean, we are creating a relationship even though they never set foot on campus. But it's difficult.
I heard you say time.
Time.
How much more time in a face-to-face?
How much more time? For me, it takes, somebody told me a long time ago that if you give me 10 minutes, I can talk for 10 hours, but if I only have 10 minutes, it takes me 10 hours to prepare. And that's sort of been my judge on it. If you know that you have this set amount of time and you want to get these instructional things across over a period where you're not standing there saying, sit in class and do this assignment, you really have to think. You have to think about your content and how you're going to lay it out very carefully. And I think for me, it came down to what's really the most important things. If I'm going to have them do this reading, what are really the things I want them to get out of them? I think probably the biggest complaint I get from the students is, especially on discussion boards, my philosophy has always been to monitor them, especially with the graduate students. They get into conversations and I'll monitor them. I may add things here or there, and they're fine with that. Undergraduates always wanted me to tell them, what do you think? And, well, if you can't tell what I think from my lectures and, kind of the direction I'm leading, then I probably wasn't doing as good a job. I don't hear that as much anymore. But I tend to use more guiding questions, and just kind of get it in. But I think part of it is I do a lot of thinking. When I started developing this program in 8-week modules, I ripped off 8 sheets of paper and I laid it one out for each week and looked at the course objectives and then started figuring out from the backwards how I was going to meet all those course objectives each week. And it took a lot of time per class. But we were the first program at Washburn to get HLC accredited or get HLC approval for a compressed online program because we met all the instructional time and the way the content was laid out.
I might just add to that Vicki's program and her hard work paid off in many ways in a new program that the university just launched this year, a master's in communication and leadership, 8 weeks, all online, involved people in the Leadership Institute and the Communications Department, Arts and Sciences, which it was kind of interesting. It may be a little more challenging. I'm digressing, Vicki, because the College of Arts and Sciences has a lot more steps than School of Applied Studies, and some of us joked that it was a 12-step process and everybody was drinking at the end of it. But it got through those process. The general faculty, one of the unique things about Washburn is the general faculty, the entire general faculty, at least those who show up, have to approve a new program, which is kind of interesting. Made it through Kansas Board of Regents and made it through HLC, and much of that effort was driven by the model that Vicki had created with her program. So that's a roundabout way of saying thank you for that. And being a resource for colleagues and other faculty, much like we try to do through these showcases.
So absolutely. So the first one's always the hardest.
Well, anything else? I really appreciate you visiting with us today. These are the types of things that we try to share with people. My phone's going off, obviously, but we try to share with people and provide those with links out there. So I would encourage people that are watching this today, if you want to see other sessions that we've done in the past, you can go out to our KCREACHE website, and we have resources available that we've been doing this all year long, and we hope to continue doing that. Vicki, thank you again for sharing your course and your comments and stuff today. We really appreciate that. I see some chats. If there's any other questions that you'd like to have, we are monitoring the chat today.
Looks like we've got a couple of thank yous. And Ed, Vicki, as in the past, if people have questions later on after we conclude today, I'm sure Vicki would be happy to try to address those.
Absolutely.
Vicki.kelly@washburn.edu. That's VICKIE KELLY, unless it's changed since I
Nope, that's
moved
still the
on.
same.
So don't hesitate to contact Vicki. As I indicated a moment ago, she's more than willing to try to help out and share her lessons learned and expertise.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for the opportunity.
Well, everybody I guess it's Thursday, so we have one more day in this week, and then have a great weekend.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
Thank you.